Hey there, it's Michael. I wanted to take the opportunity to be able to do a little mini teaching on the triangle, one of the discipleship tools that we use in Huddle. And so you may be watching this because you need to refresh. You're getting ready to teach our Huddle. And so you need to kind of just check and see and get an imitatable example. Or maybe you want to share it with somebody else. But this will be the triangle in basically 4 minutes or less. So I'm going to set my timer for that and see how well I do. So I'm going to share my screen to be able to draw that out so that you can see the visual tool along with all the stuff that I'll be explaining along the way. So here it goes. Timer starting now. So Jesus is the model of life. He's the one that we imitate. He's the one as rabbi that we're called to be conformed from glory to glory to glory into his image. We think that Jesus is God in human form, and because of that, he is somebody that we need to specifically pay attention to, and in particular into the way that he lived. And so when we study Jesus' life, we see that he lived into three particular relationships. You can see it all throughout the gospel accounts, but Luke chapter 6 happens to give a really interesting glimpse where all three of these are kind of just back to back to back. And so in Luke chapter 6, you see this time where before Jesus selects the 12 disciples and calls them in close to him, what he does is he goes up to the mountain and he prays all night long. And so he goes there as a reflection of his relationship to God. So he goes up the mountain. We say that that's an upward relationship that he had to God. That relationship was one of vibrancy, of intimacy. You can see that expressed through prayer, through his understanding of the scriptures, his communication of the scriptures, through like his life of worship and all of the different ways that he lived. And so his upward relationship to God the Father was strong and vibrant, and it was the source of all life that he had. And the other thing that Jesus did is he comes down from that night of prayer. He comes down the mountain and he actually selects those disciples. So he calls 12 of them to come be with him. Different gospel accounts talk about how he's to come be with them, how he's called to send them out to do the things that he's done. Nonetheless, there's this direction where the disciples move inward in relationship with him. And so we put that over here, just calling in. And so Jesus had not just upward relationship to God the Father, but he had an inward relationship to the disciples. Again, things like intimacy, vibrancy were components of it, but it also included this part where he was giving his life to them, not just by serving them and doing all those things that he did, but by giving them an example to be able to follow. So he went and did ministry, and he taught the disciples to do that same thing. So that relationship kind of in the church, if you will, in the discipleship community as an inward dimension of relationship. They had access to Jesus that others didn't. Well, what Jesus does from choosing those 12 is that he then moves outward. He goes to the last, the lost, and the least. To the crowds is oftentimes how scripture will refer that. And so we call that dimension of life out. So Jesus had a really strong outward relationship to the world around him. This is where he ministered both through proclamation of the word. He taught. People were amazed at that, where he fed people like in the feeding of the 5,000, taking care of them in that direction. But he also did supernatural ministry. So he healed the sick, he raised the dead, he cast out demons, he cleansed the lepers. But he had this strong, compassionate, love-filled relationship with those outside of the family of God, and he was drawing them in. So we use a triangle to be able to kind of show these and to be able to depict how they're kind of interrelated. Oftentimes, there's not necessarily just clear-cut lines between these. And so Jesus had a strong upward relationship with God the Father, strong inward relationship with the disciples, and strong outward relationship to the world around him. Sometimes what happens in our own lives is that maybe we're not as balanced as what Jesus did. Each one of these in Jesus' life were brilliant and beautiful, an example to be modeled and imitated. There's things in our lives that look like that, but maybe it's only in one or two of the dimensions at any given point. And so maybe for you've got a really strong upward relationship with God right now through worship, through prayer, maybe through being a part of a church and all that's happening there. But maybe out is a really weak component. There's not much of an expression from your life out to the world where you don't engage very often with people who are apart from God and are far from him. Or maybe it's that you've got a strong inward relationship with a church community, maybe a small group, and maybe you're actually doing out. You're going and you're serving the poor. You're ministering to people who are far from God, but maybe you're really low and weak in the upward dimension. And so we can use this as a way to be able to evaluate how balanced our lives are. And so that's the triangle that we call it. And again, it's a picture of the life of Jesus living in 3 dimensions, up, in, and out. And it's a great way for us to be able to stay in tune with growing to be conformed to the image of Jesus Christ. Blessings.